Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of Understable Discourse, your place to go for all the best stats and analysis in the game, on the Pro Tour, all that fun stuff. Today we're going to talk about this past weekend's events, recap some of those. We're going to look at the Hold My Bag results for yours truly, and we're going to look ahead to some significant events that are going to be happening this upcoming weekend. Let's get into it. All right, so this past weekend we had the Las Vegas Challenge. You thought I was going to say Cascade Challenge. We also had the Las Vegas Challenge this past weekend, which is a classic Innova ran event that most of us remember went down, on the Wild Horse property. But the Las Vegas Challenge has now been off tour for a couple of seasons, and it used to be the first real big event of the year, and typically was the event that we saw, kind of kicking off the season. It was the event that a lot of players were shaking off the rust for, and we haven't seen it now for a couple of years, but they still host the event. It's one of the biggest events you can go to for both players, for pros and amateurs. I hear it's a fantastically fun time. And so when thinking about the LVC, what's really interesting about it is that it could not be more opposite of what we got on the Pro Tour this weekend with the Cascade Challenge in terms of, typical course design, because Cascade Challenge was, very wooded, very difficult, tight lines, all that kind of stuff, whereas Las Vegas Challenge is kind of open. It's on some deserty kind of ball golf courses and requires big shots, good ground control. It's just a very, very different type of event altogether. Both a lot of fun to watch and view, but also, it kind of split the field a little bit, not by a lot. But just like the Go Throw events, the reason we're even talking about it is because it did pull some noticeable players. For this weekend, you got players like Calvin Heimberg, Emerson Keith, Bradley Williams, Tall Paul Oman, Garrett Gurthie, Matty O, Jennifer Allen, Katrina Allen, Sophia Donachie, Lisa Fakis, Jessica Weiss, and Nate Sexton. And if you're someone who looks for trends, go back and listen to that list again. You may notice something very, very particular, and that's that a lot of players on that list, most of the predominant players, are sponsored by Innova. And if you look throughout their team list on their website, it is actually probably easier to check off the people who weren't at this event than those who were. And it makes a bunch of sense because it's a big event for Innova in a number of ways. And so seeing a lot of Innova players there, not really surprising. I've heard people say that Innova was, telling their pros, come out and play our event. Obviously not every single one did, because there were players at the Cascade Challenge sponsored by Innova, but it was nice to see the team come out in support of its sponsor. And the biggest name on that list is obviously Calvin Heimberg, because it's one thing to see pros that, I'm going to say this kindly, don't typically finish at the top a lot. It's not strange to see them go play different events, have opportunities at getting cash in different places. But for someone who is in the upper echelon of the field, like Calvin, it is a bit different to see them kind of going away to a different event. And it's not just because he's super, super talented, but, the Cascade Challenge would have been a great opportunity to see Calvin do something that we all know that he's good at, which is kind of carving up lines, especially with those tight gaps in the woods. A lot of us, if he would have played this week, probably would have had him in our top 5 in terms of prediction. So strange to see him at a different event, but that's what he did. And when it comes to the finishes for the Las Vegas Challenge, Innova kind of swept the field. I didn't look at every single amateur division and all that stuff, but when it came to the divisions that really, really mattered from a professional perspective, Innova got the job done. Calvin Heimberg took down the MPO side, surprise, surprise, clearing the field by 6 strokes over Emerson Keith. The Allen sisters had a bit of a fight in the FPO division, but Jennifer Allen with Innova did take the win by a few strokes. And then finally, showing everybody that he is the new final boss for the MP40 division, Nate Sexton took the win this past weekend at the LVC. It's not his first time having success out there, because he did get a win at the Las Vegas Challenge on the MPO side a number of years back. Really, really wonderful performance. Go check that out. It's a good watch. But Innova did have a lot of success this weekend. Now, if we go over to the actual Pro Tour event that happened this weekend at the Cascade Challenge, I think there's been a few mixed reviews on some of the things like coverage and how well the cameras covered the event. And that's a typical challenge we see with a lot of wooded courses. And the idea is, how do we really create something that people at home can appreciate? And I'll say this, if you've never been to a large wooded course like that and seen professionals play on it, watching it through the lens of a camera does not really do it justice for how impressive it is. And I don't know that we're ever going to have a way to really translate that for those at home, but we're improving, we're trying, we're getting better. And so that was one of the critiques, but as the event went on, it did get better, watching where the lines were, trying to understand what's important. I think one of the biggest critiques that I always have for commentary when it comes to courses, especially wooded courses, is you have to be able to provide context of how good a shot is or how difficult a line is, and really be able to paint a picture for those at home who are not there at the event as to what to expect from players and their shots, and what to expect from where a player lies. I harken back to what I said, a couple episodes ago about great commentary related to the not the OTB Open. Oh my word, the Champions Cup held at the same place, where it's important to create an expectation of, should I be impressed by this? Is there something for me to look out for? And then what do I know about where the player is at? A great example would be on some of the tougher holes out there, for commentary to say something along the lines of, the typical plays here are the skinny gap on the left or the larger gap on the right, but you're cutting the corner, it's a little bit more difficult. Then we watch the player throw the shot, and then having kind of a moment of silence or something along the lines that looks a little inside. And then whenever they land, kind of giving us context for, okay, they made the corner, however, they are a bit to the right, which means their second shot is going to be a bit pinched. That's the kind of stuff that we need as spectators at home to be able to really understand the context of what is and is not good performance out there. And so we don't get a lot of that. It was okay this weekend. It's something that I'd love to see the commentary team continue to work on and maybe get some training for. I'm not sure what that looks like. I'm not the Pro Tour. I don't have the money for the pockets to do all that training, but it would be nice to see more of that kind of stuff happen as the sport grows. And I don't think it's a lot to ask for commentators to understand this, because we all get it, and it just requires a bit of practice. Now, one of the things that was very positive about the course is it did feel like, and some people mentioned this, that this felt like more of a Champions Cup than what we got at Swenson Park a number of weekends ago, because this was the difficult wooded tournament, and it proved difficult even throughout the rain and the sun that we got. This felt like much more of a Champions Cup, and a few people did kind of refer to the course as very W.R. Jackson-esque, and maybe something they're trying to achieve out there, maybe put in a future bid for how that's going to work. I think it's going to need a few more years to sort of break in, and the layout needs to be played a number of times, because they did just kind of change it for this event. So it needs a few more years of work before we kind of get to that level of course, but it definitely has set the groundwork for a difficult wooded course, and doing it at a different part of the country, because it's very easy to think about difficult wooded courses when you're talking about like the Northeast, Northwood Black up in Illinois. But when you think about like the difficult stuff when it comes to wooded out in the Pacific Northwest, maybe you've got the Beaver State Fling course, but it's nice to have another really difficult wooded track out there, and to see that played. I hope it continues to grow, and maybe we see it on the Champions Cup circuit here in a few years. Before we go into the actual main event itself, the next set of match play matchups did go down this weekend with, I believe, Group C. And honestly, I'm not going to get really detailed here because there wasn't anything super exciting to talk about for this. Joseph Anderson, Joey Buckets for everyone else out there, and Isaac Robinson, they did end up tying in their matchup. Nicholas Antilov versus Ezra Robinson was probably the most entertaining one that we got. They ended up going back and forth pretty consistently, but Nicholas did get the last laugh, and he tied it up and took the lead on holes 17 and 18 to take the win over Ezra Robinson. The third MPO matchup we saw was Adam Hammis, who honestly left no doubt and closed that one out against James Proctor before it even needed to be finished. And then we got a little battle between Missy Gannon and Rebecca Cox, but with only 7 holes into the round, it was pretty clear Missy had the lead, and she was able to retain that lead, taking the win over Rebecca. Now, like I said a minute ago, the course did play pretty hard this weekend. On the MPO side of things, it played a full 2.97 strokes over par in round 1, 3.53 strokes over par in round 2, and then it dropped to 1.79 strokes over par for the final round. And on the FPO side, it was 4.71 strokes over par in round 1, down to 4.37 strokes in round 2, and down even further to 3.02 strokes over par in round 3. And obviously, the weather was a significant impact on the success of those rounds, because round 1, it was rainy, it was wet. If you look, the tee pads were noticeably slick, seeing a lot of players slip around the tee pads and causing some degree of hesitancy, which is extra difficult because when you're talking about a course with extremely tight wooded lines, one of the easiest ways to be successful is to throw hard with confidence. And when you're having to stress about how safe you are on the tee with slipping, it's very difficult to really hit that, the power in your stance, have confidence in your plant foot, and know that you can drive the disc through the wood. So it created a lot of difficulty, I think, for a number of players, causing those higher strokes over par that we saw. But as the weekend went on, it still was a little rainy and drizzly in round 2. The wind started to pick up. At round 3, the sun came out. You're welcome. But it still stayed pretty windy, and even though the wind was significant in the woods, it was, down quite a bit. So round 3 was going to be the round we saw the best scores, and that played out pretty much in the pars across the board that we saw. There are 2 specific holes that I want to talk about when looking at this weekend and kind of how things went down. And hole 10 is the first one. That was the island hole in the woods, and it kind of featured the classic missed island drop zone putt that we've talked a bit about before, specifically as it relates to the Champions Cup, and how it was in a position on hole 13, I believe, where a lot of players were able to convert to save their par, and how these drop zone putts on islands don't really create a meaningful difficulty or punishment for bad drives. And so this was kind of in another one of those. It was further back at that 55, 60 foot mark with OB behind the basket. And we were going to talk about how it performed compared to what we saw at the Champions Cup, and then how successful this kind of, design was going to be for the remainder of the season. So we're going to look at the MPO field on this one a bit more specifically, and the main reason for that is that with the distance of where this is located at, it's not something, and when you look at the numbers, not a lot of FPO players kind of have that distance or really gave it any kind of run or attempt. So looking at their numbers, it's a bit difficult to even say whether or not that spot was effective, because it ended up in a lot of layups anyhow. But the MPO field, almost every player there has the capability of running that putt if they choose to do so. And so we get to see a bit better reflection of, how the stats play out for that hole. And on the MPO side, there were a total of 61 attempts throughout the weekend from that drop zone after a missed drive. And of those 61 attempts, only 4 putts were made to save the par, and a number of them went out of bounds to make the position even worse. And I guarantee you that of the 4 putts that were made, if any of those had missed the basket, they would have gone out of bounds. So it was a very risky putt from that position, and I think it's a much better example of how to push the drop zone where saving par just isn't possible, but is just close enough that it kind of dangles in front of you, because there's a sweet spot to that, right? You don't want to put it so far out that players are just laying up anyway, and it takes kind of all the teeth out of it, and then it almost makes bogey just not very colorful, because it's not. But this basket was just close enough, right on the verge for those players who thought, man, I'm a pretty good C2 specialist, I can hit this if I have a good putt, that a lot of players tried it, and a number went out of bounds, and 4 players ended up saving their par. If I'm being honest though, as much as I thought this one played out a lot better, I still, for a sub 300 foot par 3 island hole, I still prefer that to be stroke and distance. But at least this drop zone wasn't irrelevant like so many other drop zones before it. We're going to keep looking at these as they happen throughout the year, with 2 really famous ones coming up later at the end of the season at Maple Hill on holes 8 and hole 14. And we'll see what the stats say about those as well. So hole 12 is another storyline hole that we're going to be taking a look at, and for obvious reasons, this was the one everyone talked about. Is this also going to be like hole 12 at Northwood Black, the big par 6, as Jeremy Colling would say over there? Or are players going to figure this one out and kind of carve it up? And if you look at the field for both MPO and FPO, this one was, without question, the hardest hole they had to play. It averaged a full 1.29 strokes over par for the FPO division and 0.86 strokes over par for the men. That does put it in the upper echelon of difficult holes for both divisions across the board if you look at this year so far and compared to last year. One really interesting thing, though, is over on the MPO side, this hole actually finished the hardest on the nicest day of the round. So it was almost it was actually 1.02 strokes over par on round 3 compared to playing easier on rounds 1 and 2. And this is an interesting statistic because I think this could be because more players in the MPO division felt that with the better conditions and it being the last round of the event, that they would be able to push and become more aggressive on hole 12 than they had the previous 2 days, forcing them to play a bit more conservative. So I think that's what led to the higher score. And I think it's perfectly reasonable that we should be seeing some degree of change in the way holes are played between rounds, especially on these long par 5s. We might not see that on par 3s where it's a pretty straightforward shot, but on, complex par 4s and 5s with different weather conditions throughout the course of a tournament, we should see some degree of shift in the field. Of the 289 combined attempts across 3 rounds for all of the MPO players, only 15 birdies were carded this weekend between 14 unique competitors. So that means one person, they birdied it twice. Do you know who that is? Can you guess? Take a second and think about it. What player this weekend birdied hole 12, the hardest hole for the event, twice? If you know who that was, stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out. And if at this point you know or you have a guess, put it down in the comment section to see if you're right. Let us know if you got it or not. But we'll circle back to that later and see if you guessed the answer correctly. Over on the FPO side, out of a total of 113 attempts, only one singular birdie was made throughout the entire weekend, and that was by Natalie Ryan. But the interesting thing here that I want to talk about and highlight more is that we saw the hole stay very, very consistent in the scoring throughout the entire weekend. With only 1/10 of a stroke changing between the 3 rounds, it calls into question, to me, what the mid-event development is going on with the FPO field. Because I think you would typically tend to expect one of 2 things to happen in a field where there's no cut, and that's either the hole plays more difficult because people get more aggressive, or that the hole plays easier because of better weather conditions and they've played it throughout the course of the event. But we didn't see that here. We saw it play almost consistently the same across all 3 rounds. And, looking back at really, really difficult holes for the FPO, and I'm going to have to do, I've jotted down this one for later in the year, something to look at over the off season is, if we look at the hardest holes for the FPO field, do we see a lot of score change or improvement, or just swings in one direction or another across rounds? Because I wonder how much time is really put into the preparation for those difficult holes. And I don't know, it'd be very, very interesting to look at, and we'll see that in the offseason. I'll take a look at the top 10 or 15 hardest holes, and we'll break it down by the entire field compared to maybe the top 25 competitors. A lot of fun. If you have stats that you think would be really interesting to know about, or you're curious what they could possibly ever be, put that in the comments, because I'm jotting down some of those ideas to really dig my teeth into throughout the rest of the season, and then during the off season when we have a lot to talk about as we kind of look back at the year and try to come up with some good ideas of what happened and what we can learn. Those stats are going to be great, and if it's something I can come up, figure out for you now, even better. So put it in the comments down below what kind of things you'd be really interested in knowing about that just aren't out there and readily available, because statistics, there's not a lot. I mean, even when you look at the perennial powerhouse in statistics like Statmando, you can see they can only cover so much. But there are really interesting, maybe unique, nuanced stats that, maybe a little bit of research we can figure out for you. So go ahead and put that in the comment section down below. Transitioning over to the actual event itself, for the FPO side, we saw a really extremely close race with what felt like a lot of field compression, where anybody who had a hot round could just pop off and take the lead of the event. There were so many players just squeezed into like 4 or 5 strokes. It was kind of crazy. And after round 1, the best score was only 3 under par by Rebecca Cox, with Paige Pierce being 1 stroke back and 6 other people being 1 stroke back behind Paige. It wasn't really surprising to see Rebecca so high on the list because she hit 90% of her fairways, which led the field, and she also led the field in C2 in regulation. So in the poor weather conditions on this extremely difficult course, she was able to both keep it clean and keep it in play, which is, I think, really, really important if you want to have success. And clearly it worked for her, putting her in first place after the first round. But in round 2, the same thing kind of happened, where the hot round was only 3 under par, but this time by Paige Pierce, who jumped into the lead at this point during the event. And this is particularly interesting to me because when you think about Paige Pierce and her, body of results that she's had over the course of her career, this really isn't a course that I would put her, I would pick her as a top contender for, because the tight fairways and the gap hitting, that's never really been Paige's MO. And don't get me wrong, being one of the best FPO players we've ever seen, Paige can do those things, but it's just not stereotypically where we see Paige have a lot of her success. Most of that's been found on courses where she can kind of open it up, outthrow her other competitors, and just sort of really attack the field with her distance and consistency there. But hey, good for her. This is the second event in a row where she has had success, and I hope she continues to do it. Speaking of success, if we go into round 3, we see the hot round of the field and the only double-digit round between both the FPO and the MPO fields, achieved by Missy Gannon, who dropped a scorching 10 under par without a single bogey. I think, this was the Cascade Challenge. It's kind of new on the tour. It's only had a Q Series qualifier and a Silver Series, so not a lot of people probably put stock into this event as much as they should. This is going to go under the radar, I think, but this may be one of the most impressive rounds we have ever seen Missy Gannon play. 10 under par on a layout that the best rounds in rounds 1 and 2 were 3 under par, and does it without a single bogey? Crazy. I mean, she played a whole 13 strokes better than the field average and walked away with an incredibly, I won't call it easy, she worked hard for it, but she walked away with a pretty easy win over Owen Scoggins, who came in second, who also had an extremely respectable 6 under par for her round as well. There are a few notable finishes, or lack thereof, that I want to talk about, and that's Holland Hanley finished in 5th place. Not a terrible performance for her, but I think she's going to be kicking herself a little bit, because when the European field aren't there, she needs to be getting these events, locking them down, racking up those podium finishes. And while she's probably going to end up saying, yep, 5th place is a pretty solid performance, she's keeping her, a pretty good streak going, but at the end of the day, I think we need to expect more out of Holland Hanley, who's kind of risen to be that number 2, battling-ish for number 1 player on the FPO Tour. Speaking of performances that were a little lackluster, we look at Kat Murch, who has her first ever performance finishing outside the top 10 all season, ending her streak. And this was kind of odd considering her success on the course and its history. And you could tell that she definitely is a little frustrated about that finish, but she's trying to, kind of play it off as it's still pretty solid. I would expect to see better things out of Kat Murch. I know sometime this year it's all going to connect. The question is, with the growing success of other players in the FPO field, even on the weekend where everything clicks for Kat, is she going to be able to take down any number of these players who are kind of popping off this year? The final player that I want to talk about didn't actually finish the event, and that's Emily Weatherman, who had her first ever legit DNF because she's undergoing some serious hip issues. She said that she's having an issue where her hip is kind of shifting itself out of place, and that causes her whole body to go out of whack. And honestly, that sounds painful, annoying, and on a sport like disc golf where you're trying to actively engage your hips for explosiveness, that's got to be pretty debilitating. So I hope she can get this resolved, and it might explain some of her issues she's had this season with just not playing as well as we would have expected to see her do. But hopefully she can get that resolved and we see her back out on tour healthy and ready to go very, very soon. Over on the MPO side, we had quite the show in the MPO division, because this weekend we had a near I emphasize near breakout performance from Ezra Aderhold, who was the co-leader of the field after the first 2 rounds, and he led the field in birdie rate for both of those rounds, dropped some incredible C2 putts, and just generally kept things very, very clean. That would unfortunately not be so in round 3. But we also saw the emergence, once again, of Gavin Phillips. But we saw him on the lead card this time for round 2. And while it was not his best round, one he's going to go back and kind of wish he played a bit differently, we do keep seeing his name pop up with this solid play. He's getting tons of aces. We think back to the Open at Austin where he was just acing all over the place. And I expect to see him more throughout the year in different places. And really excited to kind of track him for the rest of the year. We have Anthony Barela, who was absolutely just breaking holes apart. He is going to be the next Gando, like the Mando that Gannon kind of created at the KC Wide Open. Anthony Barela is going to cause the next Mando to be added on hole 11, where he decided the best play on this like near 700-foot hole was just kind of pitch out to the right, out of the woods, in this strip of grass between the road and the woods themselves, and then from there he throws like a nearly 450-foot hyzer just over everything, taking the hole apart, landing near the basket, cashing a birdie. We're gonna see Amando put on hole 11. I feel like that's gonna happen, and it's got to be a big blow-up face of Anthony Barela, which would be kind of fun. I'm not sure what you're gonna call it. You know, with Gannon, he is the Gando. If you have a fun name that you think that you would enjoy seeing, like a play on AB, put it down in the comments. All of that fun stuff kind of led us to the final showdown, which came in round 3, where Ricky Wysocki from the chase card and Simon and AB on the lead card duked it out for who was going to come out on top. There were some other players in the mix, like Isaac Robinson and Eagle McMahon at one point, but as the round played on, they kind of played themselves out of that contention. So it really kind of came down to these 3. And what Ricky was doing was what Ricky always does, and that's keep his foot on the gas pedal, you know, forcing AB and Simon to have to play well for the entirety of the round. Everything kind of came down for Ricky near the end, where he had to kind of birdie himself out, wasn't able to really do that, and it kind of put the competition squarely in between AB and Simon. And despite AB just relentlessly surging, Simon would not disappear. At what point one of the commentators was like, do you think AB's like, how can I get rid of this guy? Because Simon just kept coming for him, and he dazzled the crowd with probably some of the best par saves we've ever seen on film, and some incredible birdie putts, including 3 putts outside of C2 that were just mind-boggling. Seems like the thing you want to say. I don't know. A couple of them were just beyond impressive. I mean, one of them, the first was like a 67, 68, 70-ish foot putt early on in the round, followed by this 105-foot masterclass of like an Anheuser full flight putt. And then his biggest one coming later in the round, 146 feet. And it was just massive hyzer putt around the trees. He came out of his hand. You knew he liked it because he started to walk to the other side of the tree to watch it just perfectly splash the center of the basket. I mean, incredible. And kind of showing us that trick shot, like big showman style skill, it does translate to tournament play when he's able to bring it all together. And so coming down the stretch, both AB and Simon, they ended up birdieing holes 15, 16, 17, but with a full stroke kind of separating them, AB just shoved the dagger right through Simon by getting himself a pretty routine birdie on hole 18 and getting his first win of the season. There are some noticeable finishes here that I want to talk about as well. First and foremost is Ezra Aderhold coming in 13th place after being tied for the lead at the start of round 3. He had everything he needed, all that was there. He just was not able to keep up to the same level of play with the competition around him, and it kind of looked like early on in the round he just was struggling to get off the tee the way he liked. The C2 putts weren't dropping for him. He had a big, really awesome C2 putt on hole 10 in the third round, but just the round was not really clicking for him, and it was a tough day for Ezra. But I know that with the performances we saw in round 1 and 2, that win is definitely coming. It's just going to be a matter of what event is it going to be at. Another notable name, starting with an E as well, is Eagle McMahon taking down 6th place, showing us that he could be getting back to that like week-to-week contender form. I'm really excited for that. Everyone knows that disc golf is more fun when Eagle is playing well, so I'm excited to see him keep performing successfully. But going to the other side of success, we've got Niklas Antila, which was kind of a big flop this week for a lot of predictions. I think most people expected him to perform really, really well, given his success at this course before and just his general ability to hit lines, gaps, and commit. And he ended up coming up in 28th place. And so we're kind of seeing this year for Niklas, it's feast or it's famine. He's winning events or he's not really putting himself in contention to win. And another player who had a really drop-off performance is probably Adam Hammes. He does typically have a track record of gaining relevance during a season, disappearing for a little bit, and then kind of reemerging. And hopefully this is not the start of a trend for him, just maybe a blip in his record, and we're going to see him back to contention. Because up to this point, he's only really ever had one other bad performance. It's been pretty solid this season so far for Hammes. That's it, though, for the Cascade Challenge. Let's check out how I did on the Hold My Bag. As you can see here, our picks came in 1,317th out of 4,448 participants, so that feels pretty good. I had some really solid picks here in the first 3 tiers. I just lost my points in the bottom 2 tiers where there were some much better picks available, and the pick of the week was probably Ty Love, who was tier 5, but he finished in 10th place for the event, grabbing some really, really big points for the, I think, less than 2% of people who picked him in tier 5. But did you play this week? Did you fill out a lineup and Hold My Bag? How'd you do? And if you did, I know I keep telling you to go to the comments section, but go to the comments section and tell me how you did. Did you beat me? If you did, rub it in my face. Let me know about it. Transitioning to this upcoming week, we have 2 main events that are going to be going on. The first is we're going to be getting our first European stop at the Konopiste Open, and they are playing at the Konopiste Castle Park. And there are some solid American players who are traveling for the event, like Paul Ulibarri, Ezra Aderhold, James Conrad, and Eric Oakley. I have heard word, and by heard word I mean I saw it on Staggered Stances podcast, that Niklas might not be able to make it back in time for this event due to some flight issues, but that remains to be seen. We'll see what happens if he can make it or not. But the European field is looking very, very strong, and I expect solid finishes from them for this event. I do not expect the American players to just walk over there and take this one down. I see this being quite the dogfight between US and Europe. Objectively, my podium finish for this, if I was going to make a prediction for it, would be, I'm going to put Jesse Nieminen in 3rd place. He's been playing really solid so far this year over on US soil. I expect him to go back to the European side and finish in 3rd place. I've got Ezra Aderhold shaking off this past weekend and taking a 2nd place. And then I've got a conditional 1st place where if he makes it to the event, I think Niklas takes it down. But if he doesn't, I'm going to give it to Mauri Vilman, who I think is going to just pop off and give us the event that we expect to see from him. He's played really well this year in the events that he's played. And I expect some great performance from the European field. But speaking of great performance from the European field, that's exactly what we're going to get on the FPO side, because we don't really have any US players to speak of. And as boring as it may sound, I think literally the top 3 rated pros in order are going to win the event and finish on the podium, with Anna Kinsten in 3rd place, Silva Saarinen in 2nd, and Kristen Latt in 1st. So I think that's what we're going to get. It's not really very, very complex. We don't have any Evelina, no Henna this weekend. It's going to be those 3 finishing in the order that I said. And I'll be surprised if it doesn't. Maybe Silva will challenge Kristen for her spot. Maybe Anniken will push Silva. It would be a lot of fun to see. And you know what would be even more fun to see? If someone who's not one of those 3 goes in there and takes it down. I know that there really isn't anyone else that I can think of who might really press that group. So we'll see. I think Tate is there, so maybe she can. But other than that, it'd be great to see some person who we're not really familiar with push the podium and take down a big spot. Could be a big event for them. The other big event going on this weekend is our next Go Throw event. It's at Kayak Point, and as per usual, the FPO field is really tiny. Only 11 competitors. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that based on who's there, you've got Eliezra is playing, and that's kind of it, other than Cat Merch. So if Cat Merch doesn't win this weekend, it's because she laid the egg. So she better go out there, take down the win. I think it'll be her second, if she gets it, her second win on the Go Throw Tour. But on the MPO side, there is a lot of competition. You've got a whole host of people, like most of the vlog squad, including Gannon, the Robinson brothers, Alden Harris. I think Gavin might be the only member not there. And then you've got Eagle McMahon, you got Goose, Andrew Marweed. All those guys are going to be in attendance. Personally, I'm hoping for a big battle between Gannon and Eagle, but I'm going to go sneaky and say Ezra Robinson's taking the win this weekend. But hey, that's it for our show today. Thank you so much for being here, for listening the whole time. I hope you enjoyed it. And oh, by the way, for those of you who guessed, the only player to birdie hole 12 twice at the Cascade Challenge this weekend was Jake Hebenheimer. If you got that, celebrate it in the comments down below. But honestly, the best thing you can do for us over here to show support is subscribe, hit the notification bell, let us know with a like that you like the show, and comment like I've told you a bunch of times so far. But that's it. Tune in next week. We're going to be looking at the events coming up and some other fun things. So I'll see you next time. Have a great week. Get out and play some disc golf on this extra long Memorial Day weekend. Thanks, everybody.